Around the time of my 18th birthday, I was feeling nostalgic for the old days when I used to play Ocarina of Time on my N64. It was easily my favorite game growing up, but unfortunately, my family fell on rough times, so I no longer owned my old copy of the game or the console I used to play on. I was in the Tigard area when I drove by a game shop. It had the name Game Crazy. I thought this was rather odd, but I thought nothing of it at the time. So I parked my red Geo Metro in the parking lot and went inside. It was a treasure trove of old games, and quite to my delight, they had both an N64 and a copy of Ocarina of Time. The console was in excellent condition, but the game cartridge had teeth marks in it and a pentagram on it, which I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, we were all edgy kids in the 90s. I took my purchases to the counter, which the cashier talked in an almost inhuman fashion, and strangely enough, her name was Zelda. I found this very odd. After all, there is no one named Zelda except maybe after the game. But this woman was probably at least in her 30s. 10 years older than the series at the time. Through her strange speech, I got talked into paying for a membership card. To be fair, it was only about $20. And so I thought, why the hell not? And my experience with the store was generally a good one, so I figured I'd be getting some use out of it later down the line. Giddy with excitement, I rushed home so I could stop playing my game. It started up just as I remembered it, but strangely, Link already had the Ocarina of Time right at the start. I thought this was rather odd, so I decided to mess around with it. I noticed that the usual sheet music HUD, instead of listing the buttons you pressed on the controller, it listed what music notes you were playing. And strangely, regardless, it would only play the notes C-A-G-E, which I found odd. Shortly after this, I got a call from my brother, who had been arrested for a DUI, which I didn't think much of because he was a recovering alcoholic. But he insisted he wasn't even driving at the time of his arrest. I tried to comfort him during this crisis. After a while, I hung up and got back to my game. The Ocarina now spelled out the letters D-A-D. I found this strange. And again, shortly afterwards, I got a call from my dad that he was going to stop paying my rent. This terrified me so much, I turned off the console and threw my controller. I then began to pack my things since he offered to let me move back in with him and Mom. After I'd got most of my things packed and I was exhausted, I decided I would relax by playing more Ocarina of Time. So I turned back on the console. I began to play around with the Ocarina to see if it would spell anything different this time. And this time, it played the notes B-A-D. Then shortly after, a bad man broke into my house and stole all my belongings I had spent all day packing. I tried to stop him, but he was too quick. This made me very stressed, so to relax, I went back to playing my game. I decided to mess around with the Ocarina again. This time it spelled out C-A-B. My dog then came up to me needing to go outside, so I took him out and brought his favorite ball. I was playing with him, and his ball bounced out into the street. It was late at night, about 3 a.m. to be exact, so I wasn't too worried about him. But then, tragedy struck, because out of nowhere, the cash cab came speeding down the way and hit my poor dog. This left me devastated. I then began the process of burying my dog. After all was said and done, to try and uplift my spirits, I went back to playing my game. This time, I couldn't even leave the Ocarina screen, so all I could do was play it. And this time, it spelled out E-D. It was about 5 a.m. at this point, so I really needed to get some sleep. But I was too wired from all that had transpired, so I decided I would watch my favorite lesbian porn. It's called Ménage à Trois. It's on Pornhub if anyone is interested, but I noticed a major problem. I could no longer get an erection. I was able to just the other day, which I found odd. So I turned off my favorite porn, and I figured I might just be too exhausted from the night, so I went to bed. I woke up the next day feeling well rested, but I still couldn't get it up, which terrified me to know that my beloved penis would no longer work. So to calm my nerves, I figured I'd play some Ocarina of Time before my parents showed up to take me and what little of my belongings I had left to their home. I fired up the console. It brought me immediately to the Ocarina screen. No intro, nothing. So I played the Ocarina, and this time it's spelled C-A-D-E. Then the console shut itself off, and it started playing a strange film about two twins in a corrupt insane asylum. It did not feel real. After about 20 minutes, the movie was in a loop, but every time it had a different character in the same scene. And then it ended with the two twins, with one of them begging the other to kill them. After watching the twin die ruthlessly, I tried to turn off the TV, but it would not shut off. I even unplugged it, and it was still playing. I started panicking, then I heard a knock at my door, and it immediately turned itself off. It was my parents. I told them about the bad man stealing most of my things and the loss of my dog. They comforted me, and then we packed my things in the car and headed to my parents' place. After visiting with my parents for a while, it was getting late, so my parents went off to bed. After a long time up by myself, about 20 minutes or so, I started to get really bored. So I figured why not pass the time by playing my favorite game, Ocarina of Time. I fired up the console because I had forgotten about how strange it was acting. It instantly started with Link playing his Ocarina, but this time the notes spelled out D-E-A-D, which shocked and terrified me. So I instantly unplugged the console, controller, and TV and threw them out of the window. So I started to smoke to calm my nerves. Shortly after, I smelled something burning. I figured it was my cigarette, so I ignored it and continued to smoke. But then I noticed the smell getting stronger, and it was getting hard to breathe. So I went to my parents' room to see what was up, and there were screams and a strange orange light coming out of their bedroom. So I started to knock on the door to see if they were okay. And no answer, just more screams. I found this strange, so I opened the door, and the room was an inferno, and black smoke filled the room. And I saw my father completely engulfed in flames. He then, in desperation, jumped out of the window, which I didn't think was like him at all. And my mother was lying in a pile of ash where their bed should be. Again, I found this strange, so I went to ask my mother what was going on, but I realized she was dead, and that the whole house was burning to the ground. So I immediately ran outside and went to check on my father in the yard. He was dead too. After about 2 hours of wondering what to do, thankfully one of the neighbors thought to call 911 to get the fire department. Though they were too late, the house and everything in it was burned to the ground. Realizing what had happened, I started to cry my eyes out. While on the ground, I noticed that my console game and TV had survived. So to cheer myself up, I figured I would see if any outlet survived the fire. And thankfully one did. So I fired up the console. But this time, the ocarina spelled out something that highly offended me. It spelled out F-A-G, which filled me with rage, so I ripped out the cartridge, and then I scalped it to make sure I never would play this vile game again. Let this be a lesson. Never buy a game from a store called Game Crazy. It might just ruin your life.